Good morning, Kairos of Oak Ridge. Uh, we are continuing this morning with our review process of our series, The Prophet in You, and we have Geoffrey and Andrea who are going to take their part and discuss and review some of the topics and subjects that they taught on last year as we're winding this series down. So take it away, Geoffrey and Andrea.
Well, now, from where I recall from last time, Andrea, you had left off with Agabus, and Paul was in a position that he had made himself the decision to go up to Jerusalem, and Agabus was prophetically giving the outcome of the story of his going up to Jerusalem. It seems like Paul would find himself in a bit of a quandary here. He's going up to Jerusalem under the vow of a Nazarite for purification. Now, as it turned out, this would end up in sort of a disaster for Paul. Paul would be recognized by the Jewish leaders there at the temple. And there was such a chaotic disaster because of his bringing forth his message of the resurrection. Now, what would be so funny about this? God is in control of everything, and he is setting up this whole situation for all these problems to begin with, and Paul knows it. Even though he's referred not to go to Jerusalem, he's going regardless. And as he goes, he's doing everything accordingly to the Jewish customs. And as it turned out, he has been by the Romans. He's been taken in by a group of Romans to get him out of there. Otherwise, they were going to kill him. And so he heads off with a guard to Caesarea to stay at Caesarea until this thing can be ironed out. And the next thing on the agenda is he ends up staying there until the governor of that day was Felix. And Felix, his time has expired, and the new governor comes out, and this is Festus Porcius. He also has been alarmed by this situation with Paul being held prisoner, and he goes up to Jerusalem to find out what the story is. And he goes and finds out these Jews, the leaders in the temple who claim to be, but have accusations against Paul according to their belief that he has totally blasphemed Moses and the law and the temple, and has insulted all the leaders there in the priest. So Festus argues that if this be the case, then you need to come to Caesarea and confront Paul being the accusers. And as it would be, that Festus would return back with some of these accusers to meet Paul face to face in the court there at Caesarea. Now Paul's here. He's got God working for him. for one, he's a Roman citizen, and for the other thing is he has committed no crime worthy of death, and they want to kill him. And as it is, they came into the court there at Caesarea with Festus, Porcius, and now it seems they just brought up lies against Paul on which he has not committed any crime whatsoever against the Roman law that warrants death. So now he's trying to tell Paul, would you go up to Jerusalem from Caesarea? And this is where the plot gets a little thick. Festus knows the Jews want to kill him. Festus has the duty to please the multitude. And on that note, Festus knows they're going to kill Paul. There's been 40 Jews that have committed to no food, no water until Paul is dead. Now, Paul again, he knows by the law he is a Roman citizen, and he denies going to Jerusalem because he knows they're going to kill him, and he appeals to Caesar. This is his get out of jail card free. Get out of jail. Well, howbeit, this is very problematic for Festus. Festus decides that to Rome you should go. If you appeal to Caesar, you are a Roman citizen. He has to comply with the law, with Roman law. Now, as it turns out, King Agrippa and his wife Bernice, days after this, they come to meet Festus, and Festus brings in this problem of this prisoner, this Paul, and that which the Jews have, the Jews want to kill him because of crimes he's committed against them. And he sees no warrant for death in the things that Paul has done. Paul is he's teaching the resurrection of Christ, which is not warranted of death. And now Agrippa, there's one problem. Festus can't send a prisoner to Caesar without a letter explaining the sentence of death and what he's committed, and he's committed no crime. So he has to go to King Agrippa and explain this to Agrippa of this dilemma that Festus can't get out of. He sort of stuck himself in this. Now, Festus is not a religious person whatsoever. He's more of a superstitious. But Agrippa is just the opposite. Agrippa is very fascinated with the Jews. He respects the Jews. He's very knowledgeable of the prophets. So Agrippa is kind of going to be his way to win this dilemma. And as it stands, Agrippa calls for a meeting with Paul to see what this man has to say. And Paul goes in an introduction about how he tried to destroy the Christian churches, and he had papers from the leaders. They know who he is, that he was going to rout out Christians and bring them back in foreign cities and bring them back to Jerusalem to discipline them. And on the way, on this one journey, he was going to Damascus, that he had his encounter with the light, that light being Jesus Christ. And he tells the story to Agrippa all the way through to the point that he preached this to the Gentiles. He took this message not only to the Jews, he took it to the Gentiles also. And this is kind of a very new thing. They don't really understand what is the cause of all this. So it's sort of seems to be a lot of confusion going on here. But again, in this court with Agrippa, Paul, his explanation is so convincing that Agrippa speaks out that you almost convinced me to be a Christian. That's how convincing Paul was on this whole thing. So this is the story that Paul has laid it out, and he is still found not worthy of death. But he has Agrippa says this man could have been set free, but because he appealed to Caesar, he has to go. And now they're going to set sail. So they get on a boat here. This is where the journey, and Paul he's taken by a centurion by the name of Julius. Julius means fair-haired, and he's his escort on the way to Rome. And they start off their journey, and they stop at Sidon. And at Sidon, Julius allows Paul to leave the boat to go visit on land, free, without anybody with him. Paul has really been proven to be very loyal to what he's about to achieve here, and so we can see that there's not really any harshness toward Paul. He was pretty well mistreated by the Romans, and they're trying to be nice to him now because he's going to Caesar. And as the journey takes, they would come to a port. The next port, they would change ships onto an Egyptian grain ship, a real ship. And all the prisoners that were on their way, they all boarded this ship. And this ship would follow a trade route, which was very common. This Egyptian grain ship would follow this because it's a trade route. And it was in Western Asia, just off the shore. And they would stop at several different stops on their way. And it was, in the scripture, it says it came to the time that the fast was over, speaking of Day of Atonement, which had just passed, and they came to a place called New Haven, which is a port on the eastern side of the island Crete. And it was just in front of a turn of the weather where it was become non-conducive to good sailing. And Paul had a vision, or he had not a vision, or the angel of the Lord came to see Paul and told Paul that the journey was headed for disaster, that the ship was going to be lost, but no lives would be lost. All souls, no souls would be lost. And Paul would confer this. What was Port Haven was not really a wintering place, and there was another port just 3 miles down the shore that they would provide the amenities for that ship for wintering. And they thought, well, they didn't listen to Paul, and so they just went ahead and gave a go at it. And as they went, not very long shortly, a storm arose. So this is a hurricane that is a prominent type weather scenario at this time of year. And not only that, the storm, they're going to run into some waters that are highly dangerous. In the northern part of Africa, there are a lot of sandbars that skirt the coast of Africa. And if they land in that, they're dead. So here it is. They end up in this storm. They have to drop the mainsail and they shoot a jib, a small sail, to sort of ride the storm, to sort of keep the boat going in a specific direction. And at this time, there was no way they could really determine what direction they were going, because they navigate by the stars. And it would be that there was no way in which they could navigate, but they're under, again, God is doing all this for his purposes. And as the story goes, they go 14 days until they realize they heard waves crashing on a shoreline, and they knew they were right off the coast of land, not knowing where it was. And what they did, they secured the boat right off the shore, not to come into land to destroy the boat, until it was the middle of the night, until the morning. And as it turned out, the land was visible in the morning. And at that time, they knew they were safe. But Paul, he had given instructions. Now, at this time, they hadn't eaten for 2 weeks, had instructed everybody to take food to gain strength, because now they're going to have to swim. That's coming soon. What they'll do is they'll pull the anchors up, and the boat will run toward. They found just a small little area in the opening of a little inlet that the boat could fit in. It's just a little inlet where the sea and the land met. That would be suitable. And so all this is going on. Paul's giving all the instructions. At this time, they believe Paul. Their faith is strengthened, and the boat is destroyed in the backside, and it's invariably falling apart. And as it turns out, everybody gets off the boat, and they land on this unknown island. This island is called Melita, and today that same island is Malta. And they landed on this, and not knowing who it was or who they were, but they were very kind to the people on the boat. Altogether, there were 276 people, and as it turned out, they treated them very nicely. Now Paul, they were building a fire soon after they got on land that day, and a viper came out and attached it to Paul's hand, who was handling some wood. And the people of the island saw this happen, and they thought this man was truly a murderer, because he survived the shipwreck, he survived the storm, but on land, this viper bit him. And as it goes, that the viper did not have any ill effect, and he survived it. And they thought that this man was a god. Of course, we know that's not true. Um, God was in charge. He was going to make sure it didn't matter what happened to Paul. He was not going to die in this. He's going to Rome. When God says something, it's coming to pass. And after that, the man in charge, his name's Publius. He says his father's sick and ill, and Paul is taken and goes and heals his father. And again, there has to be some sort of faith involved in all healings. So we're going to see here, Paul is doing some evangelizing here. And it says the whole island brought in sick and diseased people, and Paul healed them all. But here's the real story. It's not Paul that's healing, it's God that's healing. And we have to understand that all these trials and tribulations that Paul's going through are producing the distribution of this Christianity. Christianity is being spread by God's divine hand. He's causing all these things to happen. They stayed there for 3 months. That's plenty of time for Paul to go to work and speak the gospel. And then they got another ship that had wintered there. They were able to board another ship, which took them to another island just north of there, Syracuse, which is western Sicily. And from there, they made it all the way to Italy. And once they arrived at their destination, he finally made it to Rome. And as it turns out, he was released in a house arrest. And howbeit, he joined up with the Jews in the town that he was staying at, and they came to him because they had not heard of any of the trouble that went on in Jerusalem about their concerns about concerning killing Paul because of this new doctrine of the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And it's interesting that there was peaceful reception for him. He went there and accomplished everything he did. And some believed, and some just kind of held their peace about it. But again, God is taking this message, you're going to Rome, where Paul in the book of Acts in chapter 9, he's delivered his mission of sending the gospel to Israel, to the Gentiles, and to the kings and queens of the ethnos. So this is to bring light over dark, to expel darkness. Basically, Paul's whole mission is to bring light, the light of our Lord Jesus Christ, and to destroy all of Satan's and all his lies. Any questions? No.
You said Bernice was.
Bernice is the wife of Agrippa.
Where's that?
That is in
Give me the verse.
chapter 26.
Show me the verse.
Okay. There's only one place there in Agrippa. 25. Excuse me. Right before 26. Okay, you're looking for Bernice. Okay.
Well, 13. It was his sister.
Yeah.
That's Herod Agrippa II. He had two sisters that you see in the Bible. Berenice, which comes out as Bernice in the King James, and Drusilla.
Right. Right. So as it stands, Bernice, there's a little bit of background information about this woman. She was married to her uncle, or I don't know exactly what the story is, but she was sort of already entwined in the family somehow, and she was divorced, and this is a brother and sister. Yes, I understand.
Although they were consorts. The Josephus, who,
So they were both theologians.
But were they, so they were together and they were brother and sister, right?
and then to prove that wasn't going on, she married some other guy, and then they got divorced, and then it was like Josephus basically said they were consorts, and Josephus knew Agrippa, they were friends, so he wouldn't have written something terrible about him unless it were true. Well, that was, hey, you go back to those Roman days, there was a lot more of that than we realized. Brothers and sisters and stuff like that.
Yeah, they wanted to maintain, I guess, everything in the family.
I guess.
I don't know how you perceive it, because the Romans, they perceive their leader as God. So what more would it be that they would want to stay in their own, I don't know what you call that, but in that culture, that was how, we don't understand. I mean, this is 2,000 years ago.
No, I know that.
And so we tend to have a little bit of a prejudice against the older cultures, but we don't know. We weren't there. So, as it
Romans
stands.
did too, because back when Julius Caesar, before they were emperors, that was one of the biggest complaints against Cleopatra. They despised the Egyptians. The Egyptians hated them because of the fact that the Egyptians kept it in the family, and I think it's interesting. You go down a few centuries, you go down a century or two, maybe less than that, they're doing the same thing. It's interesting. Anyway.
Yes, their train of thought was not our train of thought today.
No.
And as we know by law, God eventually laid it out that he was more interested in us not to intermarry in our own families, because he knew, because at this day, man's genes had diluted so far. He did not, because they were so diluted that so many mixed people, that he didn't want them coming together. He wanted them to only outside of family. I think there was something biological, because God knows everything. Any more?
In your story about Paul, can you kind of just touch lightly on the fact that there were times when he said something's going to happen and it happened, acting as the prophet? What were the times that you throughout that story where he said something's going to happen and it happened?
The major thing is they would not listen to Paul. And then after the fact, Paul would say after the storm, they had to throw a board off the ship. A lot of the ship's tackling. And Paul said, you should have listened to me when I told you there was a storm coming.
So he told them not to leave because the storm was coming, and they left.
They thought they could just go 3 miles
And then he told them what to do if they want to live, this is what they have to do, which is what happened when they finally, the ship hit land and broke up. he told them prophetically ahead of time.
Right. There was a small group. Some of the sailors were trying to act like they were setting anchors out in the front of the boat, but in actuality, they were trying to put down the lifeboat, which was pulled up at the beginning of the storm. There's a lifeboat, and they put it on this ship. And when they were at Malta, these men that were setting the anchors in the front, they were acting like they were working, but they were trying to put the lifeboat out. Now, Paul knew that they would die, and he told the centurion to do something. So the centurion went up and cut the boat and released the boat into the ocean so it would be destroyed, that no man was going to leave the ship. That's part of the prophecy of what Paul was saying, that no man's going to die. And he would say that all the men that can swim must go first. And then those that couldn't swim would jump off the boat and grab onto materials of the boat that had been destroyed by the storm, that were floating around the ship. And this is following God's instructions. And when you follow God's instructions, everything he says will come to pass as he speaks. And that is the teaching that we stand on today. That when we follow all God's teachings today, the outcome of those will be the same. I love that song, Jireh, that he said the power in us from him will give us Jireh, which is to provide us with everything we need. According to my power working in us, he provides everything we need. So that's so outstanding to understand that principle, that we wish the whole world to have that available to them. All the people that are coming against God, if they would just accept God and according to his power working in us, they would receive everything they need. But again, God uses whomsoever, whatsoever he uses for his own purposes. As we can see that here, Agrippa is completely opposite from Festus. It's sad, but this was just the way it was.